Free energy now.
Imagine a world in which each home has its own power generator that obtains its energy in such a way that no fuel has to be added. Imagine every vehicle being able to run without ever stopping for fuel. Imagine each appliance having its own power source that never has to be recharged. That is the world of the future. Join with us now as we track our progress towards such a world.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Sterling Allen. You can join us online at freeenergyquest.com. We're joined today, September 23rd, 2014, by JJ Dewey in Boise, Idaho. In addition to being one of my most interesting friends, JJ is an author, lecturer, and connoisseur of all things esoteric extraordinaire. His material can be found online at freeread.com. You'll notice that I have him scheduled to join us on October 28th as well to talk about soul contact. I met JJ over a decade ago and have enjoyed the material he has produced. As with anyone, there are areas where JJ and I disagree, but overall, I find his material to be extremely enlightening. In the introduction to this show on our website, I said, some consider him to be the possible reincarnation of Joseph Smith. We'll be talking about reincarnation, the teaching of which got him excommunicated from the Mormon Church. How does reincarnation fit into a Christian or LDS worldview? He also does past life regression, so that's quite the introduction. I love controversy, and JJ's not afraid of it either. JJ, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So let's just jump right into the deep end here. And I know a lot of people in this audience are not going to really be balking at the idea of reincarnation. I think most of them probably are on the same page. So we don't need to tiptoe in the subject, but one of the things I do want to address that you're really good at, you wrote quite a few documents, if not maybe even a book, that got you excommunicated, where you basically articulated all the reasons for reincarnation from an LDS/Christian vantage point, going through some of the scriptures that are hang-ups for people and how they fit into the whole paradigm. And so really I would consider this more of a tools for presentation for people like myself that I've got some friends who are kind of stuck on this idea of reincarnation. That's a real hang-up for them. They just, their religious background just says, no, 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 this is, doctrine of the devils, it's not of God.
Yeah.
You got to stay away from it. So let's give us some tools, and at the same time, if there are people in the audience who have a hard time with reincarnation, maybe you'll find this presentation of interest as well.
I have three free documents on the freeread.com about reincarnation. One is a treatise called Re-Incarnation in the Bible, and the other is called Reincarnation in Mormonism, which proves it not only from the Bible but from Mormon scriptures. And then I have a full book called Eternal Lives, which goes into it in more depth, and that's also free on my website there. So I've covered it quite a bit. And what's interesting, there's also a lot of physical evidence for reincarnation. People have been taken back and identified as certain people, and then they've gone and found that everything they said about that particular person was true. Or now a guy named Ian Stevenson did a bunch of research on children that could naturally remember their past lives. A lot of children do remember their past lives up until the age of about 7 or 8, and then they forget. So he concentrated on these children, and he would he made hundreds of different case studies, and he would not accept a case unless the person gave physical evidence. For instance, they would say, I was born in a town several hundred miles away, and then they would identify a lot of things that they had never seen in this life, and then he would take the child to that town and identify certain things. And he did this over and over, and so much that it's, it just pretty much physically proves reincarnation.
Now, one of the rebuttals that I've heard to that particular point of view is that the demons have access to all information and could reveal that information intuitively to the person so that they're getting the information from the dark side. What would you say to that?
Well, that means almost everybody is full of demons, because almost everybody can be taken back if you spend enough time with them. About half the people can be taken back in just a few minutes. And,
you're talking about past life regressions?
Yes, through past life regression. About half the people can be taken back on a one-to-one basis in, say, about 10 minutes or so. And then the other half have a little bit more difficulty, and probably about 70% can go back pretty good, and the other 30% are these are people that are very mental, and they have a harder time because they're analyzing what the person is doing that's taking them back, and so it makes it more difficult for them to go back. They have to go back intuitively or some other way.
Mm-hmm. And is this past life regression thing, is this a therapy that you offer? Do you have like a link on your website where people can go for this?
No, I don't. I just do it at a seminar now and then, and to individuals I come across. I started experimenting with different things when I was younger. Matter of fact, I was in the Mormon Church, and they teach the reincarnation as the doctrine of the devil, and so I figured, well, I kind of went along with that until I started experimenting with taking people back to the date of their birth, which everybody believes that we had a date of birth, so well, I figured there wasn't anything wrong with that. And I started taking a lot of people back to the day that they were born and having them describe what it was like being born and right afterwards. And one thing I found interesting was that a lot of people can't really see right after they're born. They have to take them a week or two to learn how to see, which see properly anyway. They can see light, but they can't really make out images very good. It's actually something they have to learn. But anyway, I was at this church party one time, and I was, how old was I, about 22 or so. I just come back from a Mormon mission, and it was kind of boring, and so I thought, well, I'd maybe inject a little interest in this. So I told the group, look, I can take people back to the day that they were born if somebody wants to try it out. And somebody says, take her back, and this was the gal that was hosting the party. And just as I started to take her back, her husband stepped out of the house to go get some potato chips for everybody. So he took off, and I set his wife in a chair and took her back the day she was born. And then I thought, all good Mormons believe in a pre-existence, that you lived with God before you were born. So I thought, well, I wonder what would happen if I tried to take her back before she was born, see what she said. So I told her to go back before she was born, and she went back to the days of life in the days of the Roman Empire, and she said she was married to a Roman senator named Marcus Aurelius, not the emperor, but somebody that was named after him. And he was killed in battle. And then I took her to another lifetime, and it was back in prehistoric times, and they were also mates back then. And so she was a mate in two different lifetimes. I took her back to a third lifetime where they were not married. But anyway, they were mates in these two lifetimes. And then, so I took her back to the present. Boy, everybody was pretty astounded because they were all staunch Mormons at this party. And then the husband comes back from getting potato chips. He didn't hear anything that was said because he was out in his car and down at 7-Eleven. So when the husband comes back, everybody says, take him back, see what he says. So we stood him in the chair, and I took him back before he was born, and I says, what is your name? And he says, Marcus Aurelius. I'm a Roman senator. And he said it was killed in battle, exactly the same thing she said. And you should have seen everybody's faces at the party. They were, everybody about turned white. And I took him back to the previous lifetime, and he went back to prehistoric times and described the same type of vegetation and animals that she did. And then when I took him back to the present, boy, everybody says, oh, man, my testimony's shaking. And I thought, well, you know, there's got to be some other explanation. Even though this happened, this didn't convince me. And I was kind of hard to convince myself. I had to undergo several other proofs until I was finally convinced. And when I was convinced, it, you know, changed my whole life and way of thinking, because I had to completely reorganize the way I thought about religion and life and philosophy when I realized there was reincarnation.
Yeah, I would say for me, it has greatly enriched my paradigm. It's given me a lot more empathy and sympathy for people. I'm not so hung up about them messing up in this lifetime because I realize they're just learning and growing. Yeah. And they always can have other chances. Not that we want to blow this lifetime. We want to do the best we can in every lifetime. But let's talk about some of the scriptures that are a hang-up for people. For example, in the Book of Mormon, this life is a time to prepare to meet God. And there's also one in the Bible that says something like, you know, this life only or something like that. I can't remember the exact wording.
Yeah, it is given to man once to die, and after this the judgment. What's interesting is that out of the whole Bible, that's really the only one you can use against reincarnation, but there's hundreds of them that support reincarnation, but they focus on that one. But what's interesting, let's go through that one scripture then, if you like. It says, it is given unto man once to die, and after this the judgment. The word man really means mankind, so it's the human race as a whole has a death sentence upon it, in other words. But in other words, he's saying, but then he throws in a but. He says, even though the human race is in a state of death, after this is the judgment. Now, the judgment is a mistranslation. It comes from the Greek word that means crisis. The Greek word crisis, which means similar to the English word crisis, which is a point of tension where you reach a decision that changes your life. And so an important place where this particular verse is used is in John 5:28 and 29, and it says this, the hour is coming in which the graves, they that are in the graves shall hear his voice and come forth, they that have done good unto the resurrection of life, and they that have done evil unto the resurrection of damnation. Here again, the word crisis is mistranslated. They always, in a lot of Bibles, they mistranslate this word really a lot. And the word damnation also comes from crisis. Now, the word crisis really should be translated reincarnation. So you have two resurrections. One, the resurrection of life, where you go no more out, as they talk about in the book of Revelation. You go no more out of God's kingdom unless you decide to. And the second resurrection is where you do have to come back. It's a resurrection of decision or crisis or reincarnation, where you come back and work out the things that you screwed up on. So you have two resurrections there, resurrection of life, resurrection of crisis or reincarnation. So Paul says, yeah, it was given unto mankind to die once. In other words, mankind has a spiritual death thrown upon them. But after a person dies, there's the resurrection of reincarnation.
Let's talk about resurrection, because that's one of the hangers or difficult things to jive with reincarnation. Of, you come down to earth, you die, you have a timeout, in the spirit world to regroup, review your life, hang out, be a spirit guardian for somebody else, and then decide to go at it again. You think that you're ready to, you could do it, have another whack at earth life, and you come down again.
Yeah.
But what was the word I just said? The resurrection. Resurrection is a concept like in Adam all men die, in Christ shall all be made alive. That we die. Mormons teach that we physically die, but in the resurrection, our bodies are going to be reunited with our spirit, never to be separated, and that we become these glorified beings, spirit and body combined, and that everyone, no matter whether you're a sinner or not, everyone is resurrected, and then where you go, as to which kingdom you go, it depends on how you lived your life. And there's supposedly the angel that appeared to Joseph Smith was a resurrected being, the resurrected Moroni. And he appeared to Joseph Smith as a resurrected being. And so what is this resurrection versus reincarnation? How does that fit together? Because they seem to be contradictory.
Well, let's say there's two resurrections. In the resurrection of life, a person isn't really resurrected to be immortal in one physical form. As it says in Section 76 in the Mormons' Doctrine and Covenants, that all things are theirs, those that receive the highest degree of glory. All things are theirs, whether life or death. In other words, once you reach the ultimate in your progression in your physical body, you can stay in it as long as you want. You're not subject to death, but all things are yours, whether life or death, and then pretty soon you do choose death again. Or in other words, you choose to be reborn in a new situation, because that's where the challenges are. Sooner or later, you're attracted to another challenge. Now, what happens is there's different degrees of resurrection. The first degree of resurrection is where the person is rejuvenated. Kind of like the story of Abraham, where he was 100 years old and he didn't think him and Sarah could have another child. Well, he was rejuvenated, and so that he was made like a young person again, so they could have a child. And this is the first stage of resurrection, is the power to rejuvenate your body. And the people that can do this are called masters, and they have power to do this. And there are other beings that are higher up the scale that have power to actually recreate their bodies into indestructible state. And but these people are, very, very high up there. It's not like everybody's going to have that happen to them shortly after they die. We have to go through many, many different lives before we reach that point. So what the prophets have done in the various scriptures is really kind of simplify things to get people to concentrate on the one life that they're living now, and to try to put the fear of God into them a little bit, so that they don't think they got a lot of chances. Because that's one of the problems they have in India and different places, is people think they have a lot of opportunity. Some of them will get a little bit lazy in their current life. But that doesn't really happen to a lot of people I know. Once you reach a certain stage, you actually makes you feel more responsible, because you think, well, I got to come back in my next life, and I want it to be a good one. And so I got to lay a good foundation for my next life in this life. So
the sense of karma that you're going to reap what you sow.
Yeah. So because of that, it actually makes me at least as responsible as I was when I just believed there was one physical life.
I would
But
say
if
that
the
I live
person
more
is of a lower state of evolution, they don't think that way. They think, well, I have another chance, so I'll just do whatever I want.
Yeah, I would say that for
eat,
me,
drink, and be merry.
It's made me feel more responsible. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why the more primitive people are often taught there's just one life. And that a lot of information is withheld from us at different times when revelation is given out to mankind in the various scriptures, and all the nations of the world receive some type of inspiration from the higher spheres. But all the time, there's always quite a bit that is withheld. And the same thing with Mormonism or Christianity. There's always quite a bit withheld, and a person has to be a real seeker to pierce the veil and figure out what's what.
Would you notice that the people who are kind of awake, generally speaking, have embraced the idea of reincarnation or multiple lives?
Yeah, most people feel that it makes sense, even though a lot of people who don't believe in it kind of wish it was true. Because it makes sense to them. Matter of fact, when I was a kid, I didn't go to church, and I naturally believed in it. And then I started going to church when I was about 13, and Bishop called me in. Apparently, I told somebody I believed in reincarnation, and Bishop calls me in, and he says, there's just one life. I says, well, where does it say that in the Bible? And he showed me that scripture is given a man once to die, and so that convinced me temporarily. And so, but when I was a little kid, just thinking naturally with no one to influence me, I thought about it, and it made a lot of sense.
We will be back in about 4 minutes, and I want to ask you about kind of how you got kicked out of the Mormon Church for teaching this stuff.
Okay.
Known worldwide as the most consistently fascinating, informative, and unique program on radio, the Jeff Rense program can be yours to listen to anytime, anywhere, whenever you want to hear it. For pennies a day, our subscribers can download any of Jeff's thousands of programs featuring a treasury of newsmakers, researchers, eyewitnesses, and incredible subjects, all in MP3 commercial-free, crystal-clear 56-bit digital sound, and take these often unforgettable programs with them wherever they go. As a subscriber, you can also listen live at airtime, online, anywhere in the world, or browse through our archives of over 6,000 hours of legendary broadcasts. Subscribe now by taking the link at the top of Rense.com and enrich your mind with the most unique panorama of vital information and the best independent, honest journalism in radio. Look for the Subscribe Now link on Rense.com and give yourself the knowledge you need for these unprecedented times.
Presently, the #1 technology in our top 5 exotic free energy technologies listing at top5energy.com is what we call hydroxy technology, in which onboard electrolysis creates oxygen and hydrogen. Unseparated, it's also called Brown's gas, or HHO. By then adding this to the fuel, the mileage and horsepower of an engine can be significantly improved while reducing emissions. One of the reasons for this is that Brown's gas breaks down the larger chain fuel molecules so they can be utilized and not exhausted, unburned. There are many companies worldwide that are making and selling these hydroxy systems. We've compiled a list for you at besthydroxytechnologies.com. When you find one you like, be sure to tell them that Sterling Allen of PES referred you. Again, that's besthydroxytechnologies.com.
Free energy, now!
Welcome back to the show. We're talking with JJ Dewey, talking about reincarnation. also known as multiple mortalities. A lot of questions to run by JJ, who's very knowledgeable on the subject, does past life regressions. You know, JJ, one of the things that I see as being the most convincing about the idea of many lifetimes is the LDS and I think Christian and other religious teaching of eternal progression, that our spirits are eternally progressing, that there's no limit to, you know, our growth, that we're always expanding. It doesn't make sense that once we die that we would be locked into one level of glory, so to speak, and never be able to move beyond that, because whether it's 100 years or 1,000 or 1,000,000,000 or a zillion, we're going to be improving. And so it doesn't make sense that we would be locked in. That just does not make sense.
Well, what's interesting is the idea of heaven. They say it's going to be wonderful, I'm going to sing hymns and stuff like that or whatever. But I remember when I was a kid, to us kids it didn't seem appealing at all, and everybody was talking about second coming, and we figured, we used to say to each other when we were talking after church, boy, I hope Jesus doesn't show up till I get a few things done. Because the heaven that was projected just didn't sound like a really fun place to go to compared to just things we could do in our earth life.
I think I've seen one harp performance that I actually enjoyed. Other than that, they're a pretty boring instrument.
Now, the Mormons claim to have an edge. They say, well, we're just not going to play a harp. We're going to do genealogy. Well, that's just about as boring as playing a harp. Probably more so.
Well, we don't want to denigrate that too bad, because some people are really emotionally tied to that. But yeah, let's talk about how you got in trouble over this. You were doing these past life regressions, or you had this one experience you told us about, and you started writing some stuff. At what point, and how did this end up resulting in you getting...
Well, it wasn't a reincarnation that got me in trouble. I wrote a paper called Eternal Progression. The Mormons teach there's three kingdoms, and the telestial, terrestrial, and celestial, and so once you get into one of these kingdoms, is the current belief, then you're stuck there. You can't move up higher. They say you can move within the kingdoms, but you can't go from the lower kingdom to the higher kingdom. And I thought about that. It didn't make sense to me. And so I researched it in the Mormon writings Joseph Smith, and the Bible and the Mormon scriptures, and wrote a little treatise on it. It wasn't very big. It was about 5,000 or 6,000 words. And I gave it to my nephew, and he was really excited about it. He thought, boy, this sounds really good. Makes a lot of sense. And he was in the process of moving down to Blackfoot from Boise, about 300 miles away. And I told him, now don't show this to anybody, or it could wind up getting you in trouble and maybe excommunicated. And he thought that was the most ridiculous thing he ever heard of, because he thought people would be happy to learn about this. Well, as soon as he got to Blackfoot and moved in and settled in, he made copies of it and started passing it around. And the bishop called him in and relieved him of all his jobs and set a trial for him with the High Council within 3 days. So my nephew calls me up and he says, hey man, they're going to have a trial for me in 3 days, and the only person I can have testify for me has to be a good member of the church, and you're the only one I can think of that could testify on my behalf. And I said, well, if I testify on your behalf, they'll wind up excommunicating me too, and I'll lose my wife and kids probably over the whole deal. And he says, well, you got me into this. I says, well, I warned you about it. And so anyway, they had the trial for him. I went down and testified for him, and they excommunicated him anyway. And then shortly thereafter, they came after me. And when they come after you, they interrogate you. And when they when they find out you think quite a few things that's outside the mainstream, then your doom is pretty much sealed. But
what year was that?
Yeah. So the progression from one kingdom to another is pretty mild compared to if I were have written a treatise on reincarnation at that time, which I hadn't written it yet.
Mm-hmm. What year was that?
1978.
2 years after the bicentennial of the American Revolution.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I guess they're clamping down on a number of people. They continue to throw out all the people in the church that have any amount of light that want to freely talk about it.
Yeah. Earlier, you were talking about two resurrections, and I don't know that you really completed that idea. You talked about the resurrection of life, and then what would you call the other one?
Well, it's resurrection of crisis is the Greek word that it's called. And meaning of that really means, comes from a root that means decision. It's quite similar to the English word crisis. The English word crisis comes from it. And when you have a crisis, you're faced with a decision point in your life. And that's what reincarnation is. It throws you into a situation where you make entirely new decisions. And that's one of the reasons reincarnation is necessary, is that people get in a rut in their lives once they get, in their 50s or so. Most people start to settle in and really don't learn anything new. They may take in some new facts and things, but a lot of people don't learn any new life lessons. And so they begin to crystallize, and about 90% of the people crystallize by the time they're about 56, and they don't learn anything new. 10% keep some flexibility about them. But so we're thrown back in the mix. We spend some time in the spirit world in between lives and prepare for the next. And then we're born in an entirely situation with no memory, so we look at everything from an entirely new perspective.
One more
and
break.
What's that?
I'm just saying one more break, and then we'll pick this up. And I want to ask you about this whole thing about Joseph Smith. There's people believe that you were Joseph Smith in your previous lifetime, or a previous lifetime.
Okay.
Heart and Body Extract is like no other herbal support for the cardiovascular system. It's all natural and has no adverse side effects with any substance. Above all, Heart and Body Extract was formulated to keep your arteries clean and clear, to promote healthy circulation, and to assist with healthy blood pressure levels. It also supports regular heart rate and helps maintain healthy blood sugar levels. Heart and Body Extract is made by a company that has provided 14 years of impeccable service to everyone, and their products have never had a price increase. So if you want youthful energy, strength, and stamina, go to www.heartandbody.com or call 1-866-295-5305.
As you listen to and benefit from this Free Energy Quest show, as we track the many cutting-edge clean energy technologies likely to not only be ecological, but economical as well, we would like to remind you that we are listener-supported. You can send donations via PayPal to donate@pesn.com, or you can click on the donate link found on our web pages. You might consider a monthly pledge. You're welcome to send us ideas about possible advertisers or products to present to our esteemed audience via that email as well. Because we spend so much time doing the news, we don't spend quite as much time as we should looking for advertisers and items we can sell in our store, a process that can be be quite time-consuming, so presently we depend on your donations to help keep us afloat. With your assistance, we can help transform this planet from a scarcity slave mentality to an abundance creator mentality with exotic free energy technologies bringing power and freedom to the people. Again, that email address is donate@pesn.com.
Free energy, now!
Welcome back to the show. We're talking to Greg JJ Dewey. And before the break, well, first of all, I have to add some stuff here. I want to tell people about, if they go to freeread.com, your website, a book you're definitely going to want to read is called The Immortal. It's a fictional story about JJ's interaction with John the Beloved, who never tasted of death. And it's really interesting. It kind of uses this as a backdrop of teaching some really interesting things. And that's the first of, I think it's going to be a 6 or 12-part series you're doing?
Well, I've got books, actually 5 when you count the one that goes into the 4th key, which is about the book of Revelation. But I planned on putting all my writings in the 12 books, but then a person started the Keys of Knowledge group, and I started writing there. And so a lot of the writings I plan on writing in the 12 books of the Immortal, I've already got written. So I may, if there's enough demand, I may finish the series, but at least I've got most of the writings out there that I had in mind when I was going to make it a 12-part series.
And you have an annual gathering in June-ish where people get together. Yeah. I've been to a couple of them, really fascinating people. And the people who come to your stuff, they're just like, really, really enlightened kind of people. I enjoy hanging around with them. My ex-mother-in-law, Susan, who does the voiceover on the opening of this show, Imagine a World, that's Susan.
Oh, she does that? Oh.
Yeah, that's Susan. She loves going. I don't think she's missed a year, has she?
About all the gatherings.
Yeah. So let's talk about this whole Joseph Smith thing. I think it's very feasible. As I've known you over the years, and I know Joseph Smith, it seems plausible that you are the reincarnation of Joseph Smith. Is that something that you openly believe or state, or is it just something that you let people believe and you're not sure yourself?
Well, I don't tell people who I might have been. Some people think that I might have been different people and ask me about it, and I don't answer them. For one thing, you find almost every teacher out there that has a following claims he's somebody great from a past life, and they use that as leverage to control their people. They say, well, I was Jesus in a past life, so you better listen to me, and you better not do anything contrary to what I say, because I speak for God, or I speak with great authority. And they wind up controlling the minds of people through this type of authority that they may or may not warrant. And the other negative thing about putting emphasis on past lives is we're here to learn entirely new lessons. Doesn't matter who I am in a past life, but what it matters is what I am now, what I say now, what I think now, and what I present now. And that's one of the reasons that our memory doesn't follow us over from life to life, because it'd be a big distraction. If a person was a big failure in his past life, he'd go around feeling really negative about himself in this life. Or if he was a big success, and George Washington or something like that, then he'd go around just dwelling on his past glories and maybe not doing anything new, saying, hey, man, I was George Washington, so you need to listen to what I say. And so it would distract him from doing new things. In the scriptures of the book of Revelation, God says, behold, I do all things new. Yet the religions teach that God doesn't do anything new. He just does the same thing over and over. but he says he does all things new. And that's because everything about the true workings that bring progression is around doing new things. So no matter who I was in a past life, it's important that I put that behind me and focus on something new, something I've never done before in any lifetime. And so one of the things I've done is compiled a lot of writings in this life that I've never done in a past life, and got them compiled all in one place, and I believe they will survive me and be used as a reference for generations to come.
Now, one of the things that you've taught that I have found that resonates, that I've not heard anyone teach before, and you may have come up with it, or I'm not sure if you did, but in this idea of many lifetimes, you taught that it's basically cyclical, that you have 7 lifetimes as a male, and then 7 as a female, then 7 as a male, back and forth, so you experience both genders in a cyclical manner, and when you're at the height of maleness, it's usually you match best with the woman that's in the height of her femaleness, and as you're at the point of crossover, you tend to be maybe a little more cross-gender in your nature.
Yeah. Now that isn't really a black and white thing, but what's more black and white is the cycles of energy. You have cycles of energy where you progress and your energy becomes more and more on the male or positive side, and then more and more magnetic as a female, and don't like to use the word negative because it's not negative. It's negative, I mean, the fact that it's opposite of positive. So the male energy is radiant, outgoing, teaching. The female energy is receiving, magnetic, pulling, going within, emotional. And so we go through these cycles. And so we go through these cycles where we're in a positive male energy and then in a magnetic female energy. And during those cycles, we tend to gravitate toward the bodies that are in those energies, but it's not always the case. In when you're in a radiant male cycle, you might see the need to develop your female side a little bit more and take a female body, even though it's maybe out of your cycle. Or maybe you didn't fully grasp the meaning of the female energy that you were trying to make use of, and so you might take an extra trip as a female to learn that lesson. But overall, it's cyclic. Our energy goes back and forth like a wavelength. But you, the entity, have a say-so in what happens, especially after you have some of your karma paid off. The farther along you are in your evolution, the more power of decision and freedom you have. So the more evolved you are, the more you can have the choice of what you want to be. And you can handle the energy, whether you're in a male or female body, when the person becomes more evolved.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about, and this gets into a little more doctrinal LDS vantage point, the Mormons, the temple work in Mormon world is central to their religion, and they teach that, you know, we're baptized and do temple ordinances for the dead on their behalf, because once you die, you don't get a chance to do these things. And so, you know, if they didn't have a chance to be baptized, and baptism is essential for salvation, then you do a baptism on behalf of somebody in the temple, so that if they accept it over there, then it's been done in the flesh here by a temple worker. And
yeah, Joseph Smith made an interesting statement on that he never hear quoted in the church. He talked about baptizing back a certain amount back in time, and then he made this statement. He says, but let us not go too far. In other words, don't go back too far in time, and the reason for that is because the person is likely to be reborn if you go back a couple of generations. But if a person dies, there's a link between the two worlds, and he may be bothered by a lot of guilt from something he did in this life. And if you baptize for the guy, he can take advantage of that, and it helps the guy remove his guilt. So then he can go on and progress in the next world. But if you're trying to go back to the days of Adam and baptize everybody, you're pretty much wasting your time. The baptism for the dead can be helpful for souls that are suffering some guilt back for a generation or two.
Interesting. That does help, at least in my mind, bring closure to what seemed like a contradiction of principles. Because I remember back when I was in the LDS world, before I was excommunicated for apostasy in '93, I put quotes around apostasy, but
yeah.
It was a good experience going to the temple. I felt the spirit. I felt, the presence of those that I was helping, and at times. And so it's hard for me to reconcile that with many lifetimes, because it makes the whole temple thing moot. But what you just said explains why it makes sense to do temple work for people, do the ordinances for people. Because in my mind, I had kind of pictured that reincarnation was something that happened on a regular basis. Maybe there's a few years between lifetimes, and you seem to make it sound like there's maybe hundreds of years between lifetimes.
Well, it varies between the person. A person of low evolution and very high evolution, both of them often have short periods between lifetimes. The person of high evolution has a short period because he's kind of anxious to get back and help his brothers and sisters progress.
Well, we've come to the end. I really appreciate this time with you. It's been a lot of fun. Look forward to October 28th when we pick it up again, talking about soul contact.
Okay. That's been a pleasure.
FreeEnergyNow.net. And join us for our daily news at FreeEnergyNews.com. We invite you to see our directory of energy technologies at PESWiki.com. That's PESWIKI.com. PES, the Pure Energy Systems Information Network.
You're listening to the Rense Radio Network, nationwide and worldwide on the net and at rense.com.
Free Energy Now.
Imagine a world in which each home has its own power generator that obtains its energy in such a way that no fuel has to be added. Imagine every vehicle being able to run without ever stopping for fuel. Imagine each appliance having its own power source that never has to be recharged. That is the world of the future. Join with us now as we track our progress towards such a world.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Sterling Allen. You can join us online at freeenergyquest.com. We're joined today, September 23rd, 2014, by JJ Dewey in Boise, Idaho. In addition to being one of my most interesting friends, JJ is an author, lecturer, and connoisseur of all things esoteric extraordinaire. His material can be found online at freeread.com. You'll notice that I have him scheduled to join us on October 28th as well to talk about soul contact. I met JJ over a decade ago and have enjoyed the material he has produced. As with anyone, there are areas where JJ and I disagree, but overall, I find his material to be extremely enlightening. In the introduction to this show on our website, I said, some consider him to be the possible reincarnation of Joseph Smith. We'll be talking about reincarnation, the teaching of which got him excommunicated from the Mormon Church. How does reincarnation fit into a Christian or LDS worldview? He also does past life regression, so that's quite the introduction. I love controversy, and JJ's not afraid of it either. JJ, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, let's just jump right into the deep end here. And I know a lot of people in this audience are not going to really be balking at the idea of reincarnation. I think most of them probably are on the same page. So we don't need to tiptoe in the subject, but one of the things I do want to address that you're really good at, you wrote quite a few documents, if not maybe even a book, that got you excommunicated, where you basically articulated all the reasons for reincarnation from an LDS/Christian vantage point, going through some of the scriptures that are hang-ups for people and how they fit into the whole paradigm. And so really I would consider this more of a tools for presentation for people like myself, that I've got some friends who are kind of stuck on this idea of reincarnation. That's a real hang-up for them. They just, their religious background just says, no, 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 this is, doctrine of the devil, it's not of God. Yeah. You got to stay away from it. So let's give us some tools, and at the same time, if there are people in the audience who have a hard time with reincarnation, maybe you'll find this presentation of interest as well.
I have 3 free documents on the freeread.com about reincarnation. One is a treatise called Re-Incarnation and the Bible, and the other is called Re-Incarnation and Mormonism, which proves it not only from the Bible but from Mormon scriptures. And then I have a full book called Eternal Lives, which goes into it in more depth, and that's also free on my website there. So I've covered it quite a bit. And what's interesting, there's also a lot of physical evidence for reincarnation. People have been taken back and identified as certain people, and then they've gone and found that everything they said about that particular person was true. Or now a guy named Ian Stevenson did a bunch of research on children that could naturally remember their past lives. A lot of children do remember their past lives up until the age of about 7 or 8, and then they forget. So he concentrated on these children, and he would he made hundreds of different case studies, and he would not accept a case unless the person gave physical evidence. For instance, they would say, I was born in a town several hundred miles away, and then they would identify a lot of things that they had never seen in this life, and then he would take the child to that town and identify certain things. And he did this over and over, so much that it just pretty much physically proves reincarnation.
Now, one of the rebuttals that I've heard to that particular point of view is that the demons have access to all information and could reveal that information intuitively to the person so that they're getting the information from the dark side. What would you say to that?
Well, that means almost everybody is full of demons, because almost everybody can be taken back if you spend enough time with them. About half the people can be taken back in just a few minutes. And,
you're talking about past life regressions?
Yes, through past life regression. About half the people can be taken back on a one-to-one basis in, say, about 10 minutes or so. And then the other half have a little bit more difficulty, and probably about 70% can go back pretty good, and the other 30% are these are people that are very mental, and they have a harder time because they're analyzing what the person is doing that's taking them back, and so it makes it more difficult for them to go back. They have to go back intuitively or some other way.
Mm-hmm. And is this past life regression thing, is this a therapy that you offer? Do you have like a link on your website where people can go for this?
No, I don't. I just do it at a seminar now and then, and to individuals I come across I started experimenting with different things when I was younger. Matter of fact, I was in the Mormon Church, and they teach the reincarnation as the doctrine of the devil, and so I figured, well, I kind of went along with that until I started experimenting with taking people back to the date of their birth, which everybody believes that we had a date of birth. So, well, I figured there wasn't anything wrong with that. And I started taking a lot of people back to the day that they were born and having them describe what it was like being born and right afterwards. And one thing I found interesting was that a lot of people can't really see right after they're born. They have to take them a week or two to learn how to see, which see properly anyway. They can see light, but they can't really make out images very good. It's actually something they have to learn. But anyway, I was at this church party one time, and I was, how old was I, about 22 or so. I just come back from a Mormon mission, and it was kind of boring, and so I thought, well, I'd maybe inject a little interest in this. So I told the group, look, I can take people back to the day that they were born if somebody wants to try it out. And somebody says, take her back, and this was the gal that was hosting the party. And just as I started to take her back, her husband stepped out of the house to go get some potato chips for everybody. So he took off, and I sat his wife in a chair and took her back the day she was born. And then I thought,